Fortuné and Elizabeth Olsen. Thank you for joining us tonight. Let me kick things right off. You can take a second to breathe if you need it. Fleur, if you would tell us a little bit about the genesis of this project, how it came to you, what interested you about it, where it all began.
So it's okay. So we developed the script for 5 years, so it was a very long process. So I think I talked about 7 years ago. I was writing my first script, which was sci-fi, and at the same time I was struggling to have kids with my husband. So I was going through a lot of IVF. I was starting to do adoption meetings, and you know, it's meetings even with doctors where at some point you feel like it's a bit absurd, all the things you don't understand. And then I read the first version of the script, and I could totally feel for this couple that is going through that. So I could totally understand Mia and Orion, and I could see how I could develop the universe and also develop the characters in a more emotional way, because I think the first draft it was a little bit, they were far, and so the work we did for 5 years, it was mainly about them and their complexity and their background, so we understand them and it makes sense also for the story.
You mentioned, of course, relating to Mia, and so I'm curious then, when it came to casting these characters, how did you go about that, and why was Elizabeth the right choice, for Mia in particular?
I was, since I saw Lizzie in Martha, Marcy, and Marlene, I was thinking about her for a very long time, and so I was so happy when she said yes. And because I think, for me, in the film, the link to the audience is her character. So if I didn't have someone that we could feel for, that could do that also in the sci-fi universe, but that could be so real, so truthful, but in a very elegant way. Like sometimes it's, I don't know, the emotion can be so subtle, and I knew she had that, but I wouldn't have someone where you feel like it's a performance, and it's quite rare, and I know she can be like also so powerful, so to have both, it's very rare.
And what about you? What was your reaction when you read the script? What, convinced you to come aboard?
The reaction, so I read the script with very little knowledge of what I was reading. It was a very kind of simple log line, and I think I was moved by the elegance of this script, with it being this future sci-fi world, and yet it felt like a very intimate, Bergman-esque type of story on the page. And I personally love watching films where there are rules to either the relationships that I'm watching or rules to the world that I'm watching, because then I think as an audience member, you're not comparing your own hyper-realism to the world of the film. There's a bit of an existential sort of escape you get to have, where you get to reflect a bit more personally with your own existence when you have more distance from the world that's being depicted. And so I thought that the film covered such interesting topics to just kind of think about after, and I just thought it could be so fun to find the tone of the absurdity within the game that they were playing, and then I watched every single music video that Fleur directed, and I was so amazed by the visuals she used, the colors she used, the faces she chose. It just was such confident filmmaking. Like, these music videos are short films. They're not just music videos. They're so special and unique. And I was so excited to see what she was going to do with the feature.
I want to ask you about the absurdity that you mentioned, but because you mentioned music videos, I want to ask you, Fleur, about how your background informed this film. It's, you know, your feature debut. It's remarkable for a feature debut. How did, you know, your background in music videos and other projects that you worked on, inform this project?
I think because also I come from an art direction background, the visual part was a bit more easy for me. And what is good in music videos is that there's absolutely like no rules. So you can even change the format. You can even if the narrative doesn't really make sense, you can go into a dreamy universe. It's almost like you can, like a piece of art, like in art they have complete freedom, so that is great because it allows you to open your mind to doing things differently. But then on the narrative side, I would say that music videos, it's all about the concept and the visual, which is kind of nothing when you have to stay almost 2 hours to watch it. So then you have to unlearn everything that you've learned, because the most important, I think, sometimes you have high concept movie and the trailer is great, but then the film is like super boring. So yeah, that's why the main work that we did on the script, it was on the characters, the story, the emotion, and for that every piece to make sense, that's a lot of work.
I can imagine. I want to ask too about the look of it all, the set design, the colors. So many choices are so clearly intentional, of course with the acting, but also just with the look of it. And so I'm curious about how that came together, and you know, how many conversations did you have about the colors and where everyone's seated and where the furniture is? I'm fascinated.
I think the everything comes little by little from the story. So because it's a couple being assessed in order to be allowed to have a child, with the thematic of the childhood was very important. So I was talking with the production designer, Jan Ulvik, and I wanted to have a kind of childish, so the primary color, yellow, blue, red, I wanted to use that. So when we created the dome, by the way, which was a nightmare for me, because it did create that dome with different size of piece. It's not something that he wrote. And so I was like, they are scientists, so it needs to look like it's difficult to build. Yeah. And at the same time, I wanted it to look like a child dome.
Yeah.
And on the shoot, my daughter was there, and she didn't want to leave the dome. She was so sad when he destroyed it. Yeah, so then everything that they received for the assessment had that color code, yellow, red, green, blue, and so it makes sense, yeah, in the universe and in the story.
Elizabeth, I want to ask you about working with Alicia in particular, and just the fascinating dynamic, but really number of dynamics that you had to develop with her. You know, sometimes it was mother-daughter, sometimes it was, you know, almost exam proctor and student, you know, lots of different notes that you're hitting, even in an individual scene. Tell us about how the two of you worked through all of those tangles.
Well, working with Alicia was such a gift. She's, I mean, I wish she were here right now. It was so fun to get to watch, knowing where we were going to go at the end of the film, and when we started to shoot the interiors, when we got to actually do, after a couple weeks of shooting in Tenerife, the very first scene where the assessor is asking us her questions. I can already see that she was judging us based on knowing what we learn about her character. And I think it was so fun to kind of watch her put it all together, knowing where we were going to get to. We worked, so much of it was on the page, and within, you know, it seemed like there is a very clear arc of where we become, we're adversaries, and we kind of have this strange kind of transference, where I am actually her mother and she is actually my daughter. Maybe I'm just being caught up in it, or she's also, we're both being caught up in it. But there is something that was not as clearly on the page, which I would credit Alicia for really bringing this up, that she wanted to, as many times as possible, really figure out how we found an intimacy with one another and really needed one another. And the thing that I find most interesting about the ultimate decisions that are made within the film is, in some ways, they choose the same thing. It's just that for her it looks different, but they both give each other permission to make the most courageous decision that they could make within this world. And so I think she and I, with Fleur, we're trying to always find a frame that would be, reflective of where we are, as well as the emotional life. And it was so collaborative and so fun. And this is one of those lucky jobs where you are so enjoying the collaborative experience on set that you end up just having such a nice time whenever you're able to have a dinner. We did a lot of 6-day weeks, so there wasn't like that much time to explore or something in Tenerife or Germany. And but every time that we all chose to continue being our little family unit circus thing, traveling circus, and I think that always helps the creative. You just build trust the more you go, and I think this was a film that for both of us stretched what we've been able to do as performers.
Yeah, that leads me nicely into my next question, which was, what was the biggest challenge that this film presented to you as an actress?
I think for me the biggest challenge was, Fleur and I talked a lot about, she had really wanted it to, Mia to be so connected to nature and her body and have this sense of wildness. And I tend to enjoy playing characters that are always trying to hold on to an element of control. And it was hard and a nice challenge for me to kind of figure out what that feels like in my body. And I like an accent, and I like a physicality that helps me like get outside of myself. And this one I felt like I couldn't escape. So there weren't a lot of different variables to take on or externals, and so it challenged me in that way, I think.
Can you both talk a bit about the challenge of creating and inhabiting this, dystopian science fiction world, in the sense of you want to leave enough unknown for the audience. You don't want to spell out, all of the exposition in the background, but you do want to make it comprehensible, understandable. So yeah, tell us a little bit about how, from your unique vantage points, you went about that.
I think on the script there was like so much work. Because it's a very good question, because it's very difficult when you want to, because I wanted the film to be intimate and emotional and to be about them. I didn't want it to be about the plot that is happening behind and explain all that. I wanted to be with them, that we would feel how they would feel their experience, but still you have to, so it shows little by little what we wanted to explain and what we didn't need to explain, and all that. So I think we rewrote the dinner scene for that maybe 20 times, maybe more. So it's so there was a huge work on that on the script.
I mean, I'm basically going off of what's on the page. I think what was, I think back to the idea of rules and limitations. I do think that it was interesting to play against this idea of this woman wanting to be most connected to nature, to her work is earth, her hobby is swimming, and when this woman comes in from the state, how oppressive that feels, and how she has to feel so out of her body in those moments. And so I think that's kind of how the rules of the world of this future time comes into play, and just sort of dynamics in that way.
We have time for one last question, so I'm going to end on a fun one. What was, sort of a favorite moment from set, or something that you remember very well that you'll take with you into the next project?
I think there's so many moments, but the dinner scene was kind of fun because we were like so much only, the four of us together, with the crew, but it was always like me, the crew, Lizzie, Alicia, and Himesh.
Yeah.
And suddenly there was like 3 or 4 days where we had like people coming into our house.
Like 4 people!
Yeah. So it was kind of, but it was refreshing at the same time. So that was fun.
I have so many favorite moments. Some that I think because I thought they were just great challenges in hindsight, even though they didn't feel great shooting. But I think that the whole sequence really spoiler alert if you're playing it. But when we fail, I think there's something else scripted, and I talked to Fleur about the absurdity of the moment, and just the idea that the potential, this is hilarious. Can she just find this hilarious? And then deal with it later. And then and that suppresses whatever that is that she deals with
The
later.
laugh that she has was not on the script. We talked about it before, but she knew that idea, and I thought it was great.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know, thank you, the editor, Yorgos, he had a huge trauma in his life, and he said that he did that.
Yeah.
The only thing he could do was
His laugh. Because those moments are the most absurd.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think I enjoyed filming that in some ways. And then what follows, those were on different days. And then I think just as someone who just loves working with Alicia, I think I really just loved our little scene at the end of the film, and just kind of giving her this space to have the performance that she had, and I just felt lucky to be on the receiving end of it. And so I think that was the moment that I enjoyed a lot.
It's a wonderful showcase of both of your talents, so thank you so much. Thank you all for being here.